Hi, guys, and welcome back to Dark Matter Podcast. And this is episode 4, I think.
Yep.
So, what are we going to be talking about today? What's our topic today, Avalon?
So today we're going to be talking about true crime and serial killers, but not anyone specifically per se. We're going to be talking about the genre itself.
Yeah, because we'll be doing true crime episodes in the future, so we thought that this episode would be appropriate as more like an overview to the whole true crime thing and serial killers and stuff like that.
Yeah, because before we get into any like specific episodes, like you said, like we have many that we're going to talk about, even we're going to like touch on today. But we kind of have like a lot of commentary on just the genre itself, the good and the bad, and yeah, like we realized that there's so much to talk about with the genre that before we even get started, we would just want to talk about like you said, just an overview,
Right.
just kind of an intro to this whole phenomena.
Yeah, this is definitely a big topic, and I feel like it's gotten very popular lately. I feel like it's always been popular, but with the advent of podcasts, there are definitely a bunch of true crime podcasts, and I think people are really interested with it because sort of like a morbid fascination. Like we're all very curious people. And I think that we are just naturally drawn to stuff like that because we want to know, like, what happened, how could it affect us in a way.
Yeah, and I think that now what's happening is that people are finally because before it's like if you're obsessed with like death or whatever or with serial killer cases or whatever it might be, I feel like people would be like, oh, you're weird. And even still, people say that. But I think now it's becoming more acceptable to be like, okay, listen, we're all interested by this. Like,
Right.
There's no denying, like you said, there's how many podcasts are there on true crime? How many YouTube channels are there dedicated entirely to true crime? So it's like, there's no denying it anymore. I think that the reason, kind of like you said, because there's so many podcasts, because there's so many like just accounts across the all of the internet about true crime, it's finally like, oh, this is a thing we're all interested in. I'm not just a weirdo.
Right.
And so I think it's gotten really popular because it's like, okay, we all have a morbid curiosity and that's okay.
Yeah, and it's funny because I actually used to not be into true crime when I was growing up. I would watch detective shows, and maybe that's where my interest first kind of started because they were fiction, so it didn't scare me as much because I knew, these weren't real people, these weren't real bodies, it was okay. And I guess I was scared by true crime because I'm like, these are real people whose lives were truly affected and their families were affected, so I felt like that was a hard topic for me to get into, but again, now with the advent of podcasts, I've really gotten into it, and I think that now I definitely have a passion for it because, like, it's so hard. All these people whose family members have become victims, and sometimes they don't see justice for that. So I think that's what really draws me to it.
Yeah, and same for me at first. Like I don't think I started out like interested in true crime. I really started out loving like Law and Order SVU. If I don't know if anybody if like watches that, but that was my favorite show. I think I've watched like most episodes. And I remember like there's this character. I believe his name was Doctor. I can't remember his name, but he was the forensic psychologist. And I was like, I want to be him. Like, that is my goal. Like, I want that job. And that's actually how I ended up as a psychology major. Because, I mean, psychology is a very popular major. But for me, like, truly the reason that I ended up where I am is because of my interest in, like, serial killers and, or not, like, you know what I mean? Not interest, like, I like them. But, like, interest in, like, how could people come to do this? Like, what could go wrong in their mind that they're capable of this evil and even like want to do it and like find satisfaction in doing these things. It just interested me so much to know that there's that much variance in the human brain and that so many things go into forming a person, and that's really what got me interested in my major, what ended up spending 4 years studying. So I think it's become a big part of both of our lives.
Yeah, I think so as well, And like I said, the thing that really got me into it were podcasts. And speaking of podcasts, we do have a couple of favorites that we did want to mention.
Yes.
So our common favorite that we are obsessed with is Crime Junkie, of course. I'm sure many of you guys have heard about it and follow them. It's a great episode. I think they do incredible research on their episodes. You can really tell they put a lot of work into it, and they're super interesting. So if you guys are kind of starting to wander into the true crime podcast, definitely give Crime Junkie a listen.
Yeah, they're so good. I don't know if I had never heard of them before you, but I think I definitely never listened to one of their episodes before you started talking about them. But once you listen, I just got hooked onto the episode, or once you mentioned it to me, I mean, I got hooked on their podcast, and I just love it. I think they're good for just like in general true crime. Like they have episodes on serial killers, on just like murder cases, on like cases that are unsolved still. So yeah, I definitely recommend that to everyone.
Yeah, and then another one of my favorites is this podcast called Case File, and this actually comes all the way from Australia, so you do get a bit of variance in the topics they cover and the episodes they cover, because Case File is a different kind of podcast because it's from Australia, so we do hear about a bunch of different cases that we normally wouldn't hear in the US because it is coming through a different country, so we get a bit of a different perspective.
For sure.
And another one that I really love is on YouTube, actually. She's a YouTuber. Her name is Kendall Ray, and she does a lot of true crime cases she covers, and I think they're really interesting. They're filled with a lot of information, and she does kind of let you decide for yourself what you think. And I don't know, she's just really great. I think she does a great job. She recently made this vlogumentary with her husband about this big case of Christian Andreacchio. And you know what? She did so much for the family. She had a petition that helped them out. So I think she's doing a really great job. And I think she's doing a good job to kind of spread awareness for different cases and call people to action to help in any way that they can.
Yeah, and for me, my favorite podcast of all time, true crime or not, just in general, favorite podcast is Swindled. If you've heard of Crime Junkies, you've probably heard of Swindled. I feel like they're both like very popular podcasts, and yeah, it's just my favorite like podcast ever. I think it's so interesting. It's different than true crime. Like although it talks about crimes, it's more like, I mean, they're crimes and they're true, but it's not really like serial killers. It's more about like corporate greed, and just kind of like what money will drive people to do, what fame might drive people to do. I think the running theme, I would say, is mostly like how money can corrupt people and make people evil.
So is this like kind of white collar crimes?
Yes, much more white collar crimes. There's a few like ones that are kind of exceptions, but by and large, yeah, they're pretty much all like white collar crimes. And I have literally listened to every single episode, and I'm waiting on the new episode. I'm not mad. I'm not going to say I'm mad, but I have been waiting for a minute. Yeah, but I absolutely love Swindled.
Do you want to tell them about the dream you told me about?
Oh my god, this is so embarrassing. The other day I text Dom because Swindled has been on a bit of like a hiatus recently, like between seasons. So I text Dom after I woke up one day, and I was like, girl, this is how like much of a fan I am. I had a dream that Swindled came out with a new like episode, and I woke up and I was like, oh, yes, like the episode's finally out, and it wasn't. Like I was actually just dreaming about it. So yeah, that just shows how invested I am in that podcast.
You're in withdrawal.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's my favorite. And another content creator that I really love, like you mentioned, a YouTuber. For me, my favorite is Bailey Sarian. She's a YouTuber who touches on, or she really only talks about true crime, so different than Swindled, more like Crime Junkie, like that genre more. And she's just so funny. She actually, like, every Monday she releases a video where she does her makeup and talks about the true crime, just because, like, she'll say, like, it kind of keeps her focused to do her makeup, and she's a makeup artist. She's really talented. And I just think she's super funny. She really brings a different, like, aspect to it. Like, something she always says is, like, I'm not laughing because it's funny. I'm laughing because, like, kind of like if I don't laugh, I cry. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it's just so awful. Like, I can't comprehend it. Which is very real. Like, she's just a real person. She's super funny. And her videos are very, like you're saying, like, they're very informative, but she just brings, like, a different aspect to it. So I really, really love her. And I feel like a lot of the most interesting cases I've heard were from her perspective, because she just, like, she brings in her own experiences and, like, her own personality into it. So yeah, I definitely recommend checking out Bailey Sarian.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. And just with the nature of listening to these true crime podcasts or these shows, is that some of these cases do stick with you because some of them are pretty horrifying.
Yeah.
And for me, to be honest, it's not the most gruesome cases that stick with me, it's the missing person cases that haunt me the most because I feel like that's just the hardest thing as a family member or a loved one of a missing person is that you just don't know what happened to them. You don't know if they're alive, if they're hurt, if they're dead. And I feel like that's just the worst thing is to just always be wondering, and never to have answers or have any peace.
Or have closure, yeah.
Yeah, so, but for me, a couple cases that really stuck out to me is one that we heard together actually is from Crime Junkie, and it's the serial killer named Israel Keys. And this guy is really scary because he kind of just he doesn't pick victims out of any specific type or reason. He does it out of opportunity. Like, literally, it could be anyone. So, it's just terrifying to me because there's absolutely nothing you could do to make this guy stop or to try to avoid this guy because you literally don't know. He prepares these things called, like, kill buckets, like, months in advance. And he will literally just take people based off convenience and do awful things to them. He wasn't even caught until, like, he was well into killings.
Yeah, and that one's crazy because it goes against everything we know about serial killers.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's not like he kills women between this age that look like this. Like, he literally would kill at random, which is totally like I feel like you would only expect that with someone who was like getting paid to kill people. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, he literally just, I guess, like, needed to kill, and he just, or like he felt like he needed to kill people, and he would just kill at random. So that's so scary because it's like you can't even prepare for that. Like you were saying, like he would just be at whatever time and whatever was most convenient for him. So that's super creepy.
Yeah, and like there's again, he had no specific type or a specific way of killing. So some of his victims, they aren't even known to be dead. They're just, again, missing person cases.
Yeah.
And that's crazy because there's no way to find out who his victims are because, again, he has no preference as to gender, age, race, or anything. And, like, we'll never know just how many victims he had, truly.
Yeah, that's wild.
It is, yeah. And then another case that really stuck out to me was this case on Case File, and this was actually, I believe, 5-part episodes, and it was a huge story in Australia, and you guys should really give it a listen. I think that you guys will find this, well, horrifying, but super interesting to listen to. And it was basically, takes place, again, in Australia, because that's where the narrator is from, and it covers, basically, these foreign travelers, and they would be backpacking through Australia, because apparently that was very common back then. I think we know now that hitchhiking is always a bad idea.
Yes.
And something you should never do, but this really, I think, gets the message down because the Belanglo murders were basically the serial killer who would attack backpackers. He would pick them up, and suddenly they would just go missing and their families had no idea where they were because, again, they were backpacking. They had no phones. Their stuff was missing. They just kind of disappeared, and it took years to find this guy, and he basically had a killing spot like in the middle of this forest. It took a very long time to find him or the bodies, and it was just a very big case to me that just kind of sticks to me, and I don't think I'll ever be able to forget it.
Yeah, for sure.
And then another one that this is also a missing person case, and I think this is a very popular one. You guys will probably have heard about it. I don't know if you've heard, Avalon, of the Maura Murray case.
I don't think I have.
So, Maura Murray, she was a nursing student, I believe, and one night she basically was, I guess, driving along this road. She had a breakdown with her car, and a couple people saw her, and, they even called help for her, and within the 7-minute window of police, coming to the scene and helping her, she had vanished. And to this day, we still don't know what has happened to her, like, if she's dead, if she's alive. Some people speculate that she's off living a new life, under an assumed name. Some people assume that she was murdered that night. And again, this is one of those cases that is frustrating because we still don't have any answers.
Was her car gone, or was she gone? And
no, her car was still there. That's the thing. Like, her car had broken down. She was still there. A lady had offered to, like, call a tow truck or the police or something. She said no, and another person did that as well. He did call. And again, it only took about 7 minutes from when they saw her to the police arriving, and yet there was no sign of her whatsoever.
That is so creepy. I've never heard of that before. That's crazy to think that like all of that can happen in 7 minutes and like your life is never the same.
Definitely, and it's scary to think, like they just have absolutely no idea. There's no trace of her. We don't even know where to begin when it comes to that case. And another case that is fairly well known are the Delphi murders of Abigail Williams and Libby German. This happened in Indiana, and these two girls had the day off from school. They went on this little hike along this like popular bridge, I believe, in their small town of Delphi. And when the girls didn't show up at the pickup point at the end of the day, a search party was called for them. And unfortunately, their bodies were found murdered. And again, to this day, we still don't know who the murderer was.
That is so creepy. I hadn't heard of that one either.
Yeah, so this is a fairly recent case, I believe. And it's still a case that people, I think, are following very closely, and we're hoping, I think, all of us, that it'll be solved soon and we'll able to find the murderer soon.
Yeah, for sure. And some of the cases that I wanted to touch on, the first one, it sticks out to me just because it was so gruesome, and like I honestly can't even recommend you look into it. I know if my saying that is probably gonna pique your interest, and then you're gonna look into it. But just know I'm not saying look into this one because it is rather gory. It's really awful, but it sticks out to me because of how gruesome and gory it was. It's commonly referred to as the toy box killer.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I've heard of this one as well.
Yeah, I don't even remember the guy's name, and I'm not gonna care. I don't care to look it up because I don't want to give him any more attention. But just like his crimes they were really disgusting, and I think the thing that stuck out to me the most was that there's recordings that he would play in his I think he called it
his toy box, basically.
Toy box? Yeah, that's what... Oh, it's called the toy box killer, duh. Yeah, his toy box or whatever. The place that he killed women and tortured them. He had this, like, recording that he would play, and you can listen to it, and it's just so awful. And it's just one of those things that you listen to when it's like, that's kind of what got me interested in psychology. It goes back to that, like, how could someone be so depraved? How could they want to inflict this kind of harm on another human? Like, I can't even imagine hurting an animal, let alone, like, you have to understand, like, I, like, make sure when I'm walking in the rain that I don't step on any worms because I care about them. So to imagine, like, somebody not only, like, killing another human, but, like, wanting to, and, like, loving it, like, it's their life's work. I just can't understand it. So that one sticks out to me because of how gruesome it was. Another case that sticks out to me, mostly because of how... Oh, yeah.
Sorry, I was going to say about the toy box killer, what's fascinating about that one is that he had a girlfriend, too, so he had a woman helping him out.
Yeah, he did. Those are always the scariest because
they are.
I think I can speak for myself and probably for you, too, Dom, that, like, if you're approaching a situation and it's a man on his own, and it might be a little bit sketchy, but if there's a woman there, you're automatically like, oh, he's not, like, I'm not scared anymore. Like, there's a woman there. Like, what? Yeah, exactly, because, like, women protect each other, right? But nope, not with this. Like, she was totally in on the murders. Kind of like the Ken and Barbie murders as well. Or like Ken and Barbie. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I don't know, actually.
It was a similar thing. It was a man and his wife, and they actually ended up killing the wife's little sister.
Oh my god.
It's disgusting. That one is similar to the toy box in how depraved it was and how disgusting it was. Yeah, so it's kind of the same idea. I think the women who kill, there's like whole shows just on women who kill, because I think that's even more interesting to a lot of people, because oftentimes if you hear about a serial killer, like we're going to assume it's a man just based on statistics.
Right.
Not based on anything other than like most serial killers are usually men. So when you see a woman
partnering with him.
It's so scary.
Yeah.
So I think that's definitely a part of why the toy box killer was so frightening, and also that there was a woman who, at least one that I can remember, who survived.
Yeah, she did. She, like, ran out of his house in chains naked, so this case definitely has some twists and turns to it, for sure.
Yeah, so that one's wild. Again, I don't really recommend you look into it, but we're just mentioning some that kind of stuck with us for various reasons.
Yes.
Right, and the next one I want to mention was like pretty much the way I've like heard it like referred to is the Cannibal Cafe. I heard, I think the first time I heard about this one was from Bailey Sarian, from the YouTuber that I mentioned earlier. She has a really good video on it. Because again, we're not going to give you all the specifics for all these. We're just briefly mentioning them, but definitely watch her video on it. It's super interesting. And the reason this one is so interesting to me, other than obviously cannibal, like what the hell? Every time I hear about a cannibal case, I'm like, why? Like again, it's just so hard to understand. But another reason this one's super interesting to me is that, as far as I remember, none of his victims were what we would think of as victims. And what I mean by that is that they were pretty much all, this is gonna sound really weird, but like willing participants. There might have just been one. I'm trying to recall, but I don't remember all the specifics. But basically, this man would, he wanted to, he had the desire to eat a human, to kill a human and eat them. But he actually didn't want to just like kill someone in cold blood.
So, like, when you say his victims were voluntary, did they just walk up to this guy and was like,
right.
if you want to kill me and eat me, like, I'm cool with that? Like,
Yes.
how did that happen?
Okay, so the reason it's called the Cannibal Cafe is because he had an online forum where they would discuss these things.
Oh, okay.
And yeah, so I think at one point, if I'm not mistaken, he like posted, he made it seem like he had killed someone, but he didn't.
Okay.
He was kind of just like flexing, and if that's like their version of flexing, I don't even know. But basically, he was like looking for a willing participant, to basically somebody who was ready to die.
Okay.
And obviously the I'm not saying like, oh yeah, it's fine, they were good with it, because obviously it comes back to like, can you actually consent to die? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's not like like I think the person that he ended up killing was not like gonna die from some kind of, you know, illness in a few days or something like that. Like he wasn't on the verge of death already, because, you know,
like he just wanted to die, basically.
yeah, like
okay.
because, you know, assisted suicide is something else, and
right.
we can have a conversation about that another day, and I think that's completely different. But this was, I mean, assisted suicide, but not because of underlying
causes,
like physical illness, but because I guess he just was very depressed. I'm not really sure what the mindset was of him, but I know for a fact that this man who was the Cannibal Cafe guy, he brought someone in. They had dinner together, as far as I remember, like in his house.
He wasn't the dinner?
No, he wasn't. That's the interesting thing, because he said, like, you know what, like, I'm not comfortable with this, and the guy was actually like, you know what, like, I'm not gonna hurt you, like, you can go, like,
oh my
you're
gosh.
actually free to go, because he didn't want to take anyone against their will, and so that person left, and he was fine. So he actually didn't kill anyone that didn't want to die.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, so it's super interesting just because it's unique, and I'm not trying to
Yes.
say like, oh, he was a good man, he shouldn't be in jail. Like, no, that's not what I'm saying. It's still awful that he killed people, and
Ate them.
even more awful that he ate them. Yes. But it's just really fascinating how he went about it, and how he was
Right.
like, oh, I don't want to hurt anyone. Which really makes you think. Again, it comes back to psychology, and like it really makes you think about like, so there's people, because you think of like, when you say cannibal, you think of like some kind of savage, disgusting
Yes,
person.
you really do.
Because the act of eating another person is just unimaginable.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, this makes you think like, okay, so he can have these two sides of his brain where it's like, in one aspect, he's functioning enough that he doesn't want to hurt people. He has the good instinct of like, I don't want to hurt you, I don't want to bring you harm. Self-control and like compassion.
Yeah.
But then on the other side, he has this aspect of like, but I desire to eat people, and how am I going to go about that without hurting them? Which is just so weird to me, because I feel like every other case I've heard of with cannibals, it's just been a deprived, disgusting person who just goes out, kills people, hurts them, and then eats them. So
Jeffrey
this is
Dahmer.
Exactly, yeah. So this is just a very different story. I don't have an opinion on like, oh, he's not a, you know, I don't want to make it seem like I'm saying he was like a stand-up citizen, you know.
Mm-hmm.
He was obviously very damaged himself, but it's just a very interesting story. It really makes you think.
Yeah, for sure.
Another one I wanted to mention was the Unabomber. Again, Bailey Sarian's video is really good. On the Unabomber, I've heard of him a lot. I think it was a very infamous case, but her video is just my favorite just because I love Bailey Sarian. But the Unabomber's just an interesting case because he would send packages with bombs in them. And as I recall, not, it sounds bad, not too many people died from him. Like, people died, but I think it was, I want to say it was not very many people. Like, definitely a good amount of people got injured from his bombings, but not that many people died. And then he released this crazy manifesto that kind of makes you think. If you, I was telling Dom earlier that, like, if you check our Instagram, we have a meme that's it's basically just making the joke that, like, sometimes, like, you'll hear a villain like discussing like why they're doing what they're doing in
their
a
speech,
movie.
their big
yeah,
speech,
their big
yes.
speech, their manifesto, and you're like, low-key,
You're
like,
right.
he's not wrong. Like, is he wrong? You know what I mean? So it's kind of the same thing where you read the Unabomber's manifesto and you're like, I can't argue with him. Like, I don't like what he did.
Good points in a
Yeah.
crazy way. you
Yeah,
know?
exactly. It's like, what he did was wrong. He was killing people. Obviously, that's not good, and like he shouldn't have done that. But his manifesto just, it really makes you think. Yeah. So again, I think the cases that really get to me are the ones that, of course, are just gruesome and awful, but also the ones that you're like, that's not as black and white as you know what I mean? It's
Yeah,
not,
definitely.
The toy box killer is just black and white, cut and dry. He was disgusting,
shit,
depraved human, just awful. But then there's also those cases that really make me think, and I'm like, what is good? What is evil?
Mm-hmm.
You know what
Yeah,
I mean?
yeah.
It really, it just makes you think, and I really like those cases.
Definitely, yeah, because, you know, they're not cut and dry, and I feel like that reflects life a lot. You know, there isn't a lot of good and bad, truly, you know, black and white. There are a lot of grays in the middle, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Because in life, yeah, that's so true that, like, in life, no person is fully good or no person is fully bad. And weirdly enough, I guess even in killers, it can be that way, that it's like a lot of them aren't all bad. There is some good in them, but obviously what they've done is
Yeah, obviously
beyond
they
wrong.
chose the dark part of them, you know?
Exactly. Yeah. And then the like other thing I wanted to mention here, it's not a specific case, but it's just like a funny note that I thought of, is that like the 70s in California was like not a good time if
It
you
was
were
serial killer
a young
central.
woman. Yeah, because I feel like a lot of it, I started noticing this after a while, because we're actually based in California.
Yeah, Southern
thinking,
California.
Yeah, and I started thinking about it. I'm like, I started listening to more and more, you know, podcasts and like different episodes about serial killers. And I'm like, first of all, what was it about the 70s and 80s
know.
that just like people really went off and wanted to kill? But also, what was it about Southern California? Like,
I know.
So many. The Hillside Strangler, wasn't the Zodiac Killer?
Yeah, the Zodiac Killer, the Golden State Killer, yes, for sure. All active in California in the 70s.
We should like make a running list of like all of the serial killers that like all the killings that happened in California.
Oh, yeah, there were many, I'm sure.
Yeah, and like, of course, California is very populous. Like, we have a lot of people, so it makes sense. And in the 70s, there wasn't the same amount of
technology,
like, we didn't have DNA testing. We didn't have what we have now. But it's just interesting that, like, specifically the 70s, specifically California, it just ended up as a hotspot for that. And so, hopefully that doesn't come back into trend.
Oh yeah, no, we don't need that anymore.
We don't need a second wave of that. But yeah, that's just something interesting that I wanted to mention.
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, along with these true crime cases, like, I feel like we really need to discuss the positives and negatives, because there are certainly a lot, you know. And one of the positives, I think, like, the good side effects of true crime being a more popular topic, like, more people paying attention, is that it makes people more aware of dangers, you know, like, especially young women who are vulnerable, you know. It can teach them, like, what to watch out for necessarily, you know, not necessarily like, oh, this is what I need to do to avoid this, but more like studying behaviors, you know, like learning about different behaviors, how these predators attack you, you know. It's just something to keep in mind. You kind of want to watch out for that kind of stuff, you know.
Yeah, I think that, unfortunately, my mom always talks about how the 80s was an innocent time. And I'm like, well, it's not that it was an innocent time. I don't think. I think what it was is that people were ignorant to the things that were happening. It's not their fault.
Yes.
It's just that, like, realistically, you could have your kids go play on the street and like
that's so true.
You know, like, go play and like come back when the street lights are on. You know, that used to be like very common.
Yeah, but nowadays, like, that's crazy.
Now that's like no. Like, you're not gonna go get kidnapped, because we all, like, we all know what a man in a white van,
Yeah.
like, symbolizes, right? Like, I don't have to say anything. We all are scared of that. We know, like, what's up when we see a white van.
Yeah,
Or
for
we know
sure.
to avoid it. But those things come with time. We didn't
Yeah.
always know that. You know what I mean? So, I think that, yeah, it does, like, the more attention that's paid to these crimes, not necessarily the people who committed them, but
Mhm.
more the crimes themselves, I think the more aware we can be and the more protected we can be. Like, just like you
Yes.
said, like, I think we all know now that hitchhiking is a no-no.
Yeah, no,
But
don't do that.
yeah, because it's like, well, what kind of people want to pick you up? You know what I mean?
Yes.
So, but back in the day, that was much more common.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like, with the rise of these crimes, the world has definitely lost its innocence. I feel like
Yes.
people were a lot more trusting and open back in the day, when these dangers weren't really prevalent in society. But nowadays, people are definitely more cautious. They definitely are more wary of strangers, and it makes sense because, again, we hear all these terrible stories in the news and we have to be careful of that. We have to be aware of the dangers.
Yeah, for sure. So that is one good thing that comes from it.
Yes. And I think most people say like women are majority of the ones who listen to true crime, and you know what, that makes sense because majority of these true crime cases, the victims are more often than not women.
Yeah, exactly. I remember hearing that in a podcast before. This guy was saying, like, why do women love true crime? Like, why are they so obsessed?
Right.
And there's a woman on the podcast who was like, because we're gonna get killed. Because, like, we're the ones being targeted. Duh. And I was like, that is so true. Like, we always say that, like, of course we're the ones interested in it because we're trying not to get killed.
Yes, we're the ones who have the most to fear, I think, from,
Exactly.
that. So, and it also gives us a better look at, like, into serial killers because it gives us a chance to study them. You know what I mean? Like, again, with all these serial killers, they do have, like, interviews, and psychologists want to talk to them, kind of get into their head and find out, kind of what makes them tick, what made them snap and act in this way.
Yeah, for sure. I think that that's been a huge advancement that's come from studying serial killers and just like looking deeper into their cases is that we have criminal profiling now.
Mm-hmm.
We have we know what to look for when a lot of people go missing and it's suspected that there's a serial killer. We know what to look for. We know like who like like generally what they might be like. And I think it also just gives us a look into the human brain in general. Yeah. I think one thing I've noticed with almost every serial killer that I've read about or listened to an episode about or whatever it might be, they almost always have some kind of childhood trauma that inexplicably has affected their behavior and who they became. Again, this is not an excuse for them. This is not saying that, oh, well, it's not their fault. Like, of course it's their fault. If you kill people, you are responsible for it. And yes. We're not excusing any behavior committed by serial killers or just from, like, people who murder in general. However, I think it's really important to look at these cases because it gives us a better look at, like, how damage or how yes. like early childhood trauma can not just damage the brain but literally alter the way that yeah. you think and the way you perceive things and change your whole world. And so because obviously serial killers are few, not most people, mm-hmm. like unfortunately a lot of people go through childhood trauma but fortunately most of them don't become serial killers as yes. we know. So I think but it's interesting to see like how maybe the perfect storm mm-hmm. can really make someone's brain processes like go awry. And it's also just important for all of us, for everybody who's gone through some kind of like trauma, to see how it in like more applicable mm-hmm. to the everyday person, how it can change your brain and how important therapy can be. Because I'm not saying people are gonna just become serial killers because they went through childhood trauma. Again, no, like 99% of people who yeah. go through rough time do not become serial killers, but it's important to see how it can affect you.
Yeah, for sure. Like the more knowledge we have about these kind of people and what led to that is definitely helpful, especially in the future. Again, with criminal profiles, maybe we can even, find a way to like help before anything happens, and understanding the human brain definitely, contributes to that. And, another positive for that is definitely, with more awareness of true crime and different cases, it can definitely lead to more leads. There's a bunch of organization like Crime Stoppers where you can give anonymous tips, and that really does help investigations. Sometimes it leads to a huge break in the investigation, and that really is helpful. Like there's only so many policemen and there's a huge world, and every single person who's looking for a victim or a suspect really can help.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's been a major contribution to, or like a major contribution from, like, giving the public information and like kind of paying more attention to these crimes is
Right.
that a lot of times it ends up like helping law enforcement solve the crimes. And it helps it helps them out, makes their job a little bit easier.
Right. But of course, the flip side to that is that it can also make the investigations more difficult and lead to false tips because, again,
Yes.
like media speculation and media coverage can, sway the public or even just give out information that sometimes the police don't want to be given out because, again, it is a investigation and some things have to be kept private. And sometimes, with the public interest in that, that doesn't always happen.
Yeah, and there's always some whack jobs that like I'll never understand this, but they'll call in and like you said, give false tips. Or I mean, sometimes it's just people genuinely trying to help and maybe they have
Right.
the wrong information. But there's always people that will call in and like either false confessions. That's
Yes,
what really gets me.
definitely.
I'm like, how do you end up in the place in life where you are gonna confess to a murder that you didn't commit?
I know, like,
Like,
how far do
just
you have to go?
don't do that. How about yeah? But also, just like false tips, people calling in and like just stirring the pot. Basically, it's like, dude,
Mm-hmm.
this is like a real thing happening. Don't call in and like muddy the waters. I will never
Right.
understand people who do that. So yeah, with the influx of tips, there's also the influx of false tips. So that can be a huge problem.
Definitely. And I think the biggest negative of all is that with all this attention on true crimes, is that killers can sort of become like glorified and made infamous and their crimes sensationalized, which I think is just the worst thing that could happen. Like we definitely have to concentrate on the victim, and sometimes people tend to forget about the victim. Like, Ted Bundy, like how many of his victims do you know about? Probably not that many, but you know about Ted Bundy himself. We know about the Zodiac killer, and they've become sort of legends in our society
That's
today,
very true.
and I think that that's just awful. We're pretty much giving them what they want. A lot of them want attention and infamy, and we just have to really be careful to make sure that the attention isn't on them. It's more about their victims and their family, because we don't want to give these monsters any more sort of satisfaction. Like they've already done enough. They didn't do anything that deserves public attention in any positive way at all.
Yeah, for sure. I think that is definitely like the main negative because it can come off as like us being fascinated with them in a way that it's like we almost like admire them or like you said like they're this like urban like legend
Yes.
where of course we're disgusted by these crimes and we don't like it's like kind of a give and take like we want to talk about them because it's interesting what happened and because we want to like help prevent future incidents of like these kind of crimes, but it's also hard because it's like when we talk about them like you said we're often giving them what they want, which is attention, and we don't want to give them what they want. They don't deserve attention, and the victims are the ones who deserve attention because
Yeah.
so many times their lives were snatched away from them, and they're the ones who deserve attention. They're the ones who deserve to be remembered and immortalized, not the serial killers. But
Yeah,
unfortunately,
definitely.
what's more interesting to the average person is, like I was mentioning earlier, how could someone do this? Why could
Right.
they become like this? And unfortunately, sometimes there are people who actually admire them. I want to like mention this
Oh
as well.
yeah, for sure.
There are people who are obsessed with
Mhm.
like they're basically serial killer groupies. Like it's wild. I think they're kind of, I would assume they're people who like hate the world and like want to kill but they're scared to, so they just look up to these serial killers.
Honestly, yeah, I don't know, but there are definitely people like that, like you said, serial killer groupies, and there are people who will literally visit the jail to see them
Mhm.
as if they're like some type of celebrity and send them letters and fan mail, and it's just absolutely disgusting to me. I can't imagine how you could possibly admire
Yeah.
any person like that.
I don't get it either, and I don't know. Have you been to the Museum of Death?
I haven't, but that is a good thing to mention because,
Yeah.
you know, I think that that's another type of place that I'm kind of iffy about, you know?
Well, the Museum of Death, it's in Hollywood for anyone who has not heard of it. I don't know if they have other ones, but the one that, yeah, I think it was just the one in Hollywood. It's a really interesting place. I've been, I think, 2 times. I don't plan on ever going again because I think 2 times is like one too many.
Yeah.
But I think one time is good to just check it out. But if you're interested in anything morbid, it like will give you more than you're even in for, or more than you can handle. And the reason I just thought of it is because I remember when I walked in, like really early on, like when you walk in the museum, you'll see, I mean, they've probably since changed it. It's been years since I've gone, but there's an exhibit there of literally just serial killer merch. And
Yeah.
so I like this is I had no idea this was a thing until I went to this museum. And it's literally like they had playing cards that had like you
Oh
know the
my
Toy
God.
Box Killer playing cards or the whoever playing cards. And
no,
or they
just no.
yeah, they would have like postcards and like I can't remember what else they had, but they literally have like things that you would make for, you know, like celebrities or like movie characters.
Like merch, basically.
No, it was literally merch, yeah. And it was just like, oh my god, like something that Bailey Sarian says about this kind of thing is like get better role models. And
Yeah,
it's so
I
true
mean-
because I'm like, seriously, like how could you look up to these people?
Yeah, and see, that's the thing. It's like they know that people are interested in stuff like that, and it kind of just leads like they're doing it for profit, you know? And I feel like that's just disgusting, you know? Again, these people should not be made as entertainment. The only reason people should be talking about them is to learn, you know, and be respectful. Like, but I feel like that's a little shady to kind of just throw their face on merch and be like, here, you can pay $5 for this pack of playing cards, you know?
I question the people who make it as much as I
Yes.
question the people who buy it. I just don't understand why you could end up again, how you could end up in a place in life where that's something that interests you. Like that's what I'm going to
Yeah.
spend my money on is something like basically immortalizing a serial killer. Like I don't get it. I don't know. I think some people are
Yeah, that's not a
just
good
really
look.
disrespectful. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really awful. So yeah, we just wanted to mention that too. That it's a huge downside of talking about true crime is that a lot of times they'll end up being immortalized by people who are disgusted by them, but also by people who love them.
Yes, that's an unfortunate side effect, you know, of that. And I think, unfortunately, there are always going to be people who are like that. You know, we can't change everyone and their views, you know. So, but again, that's just something to keep in mind. You know, let's not forget, like, the victims are the ones who are truly important in the situation.
Yes, for sure.
And, you know, speaking of victims, of course, the biggest priority in any case is to solve it, you know, to get justice for the victims involved and their families. But, you know, I feel like the police get usually a hard time for not being able to solve a case fast enough or screwing up on a case. And don't get me wrong, there are many times when the police have screwed up on a case, whether that's not taking evidence properly, you know, not questioning the right people. There are definitely people who, you know, did not do their jobs properly, but some things that I think people don't think about is like psychological reasons why cases are hard to solve. And the biggest thing with that is eyewitness testimony. It is not reliable. If you have ever taken psychology, you know eyewitness testimony is so not reliable because your brain tricks you, and boy does it trick you hard.
Yeah, your brain looks for patterns, you guys. And so if you're looking for something, you're bound to see it. Like, in fact, eyewitness testimony is so unreliable that one of my professors, I remember her telling me that one time she got called in for jury duty, and you know they have to ask you, like, oh, do you have anything that would bias you? Like,
Right,
maybe, like,
yeah.
it was, like, a racially motivated crime that they're going to be reviewing, and, like, maybe you're the same, like, you have the same racial identity as someone who is affected, or whatever it might be. Like, they're like, do you have any kind of, like, bias that would make you, like, not, completely unbiased in this case? And she said that what she'll mention is like, well, I study psychology, you know, I'm a professor of psychology, and so I don't believe in eyewitness testimony at all.
Yeah.
And they're like, yeah, you can't like you can leave.
Yeah.
And she told us that because she's like, hey, if you ever want to get out of jury duty. But that just goes to show you how unreliable it really is, because it's like I feel like that sucks too, that it's like
Yes.
they're like, oh, so you know the truth about it. Like, yeah, no, you can't.
And
Yeah.
let us explain, because I feel like people would be confused. You're like, but they were literally there. They saw it. And let me explain to you just how, like, false it can be. Is that in a psychology class I had once, they literally showed a video where they had people come in and they were it was an experiment and they were supposedly witness to this crime, and so they questioned each person separately, and some of them gave different testimonies in the beginning. First of all, like, people giving different testimonies, they have different memories, and that alone, is confusing enough. However, they discovered when they put them together or um, exposed them to outside stimuli, their answers tended to change. Like, whether when they got in a group and they kind of discussed, they all decided, like, oh, I think she's right. He was wearing, like, this white t-shirt, or he was driving a green van as opposed to a red van, like I thought in the beginning. And that's not their fault. Again, like, your memories, your brain is processing so many different things at once. Sometimes it doesn't catch it, and again, when you're talking to people, your brain tends to want to stick with that. So they found out, like, the eyewitness testimonies completely changed after that, and then when they revealed it in the end, almost none of the testimonies were correct. Like, the guy had the wrong color shoe, he was wearing a hat when they said he wasn't wearing a hat. So, just that alone is something to consider. Like, yes, even though you're there in the moment, sometimes your brain doesn't process things clearly, or your brain can kind of change and implant false memories in your head. And that's another thing too, is that I don't think you realize just how easy it is to implant false memories in someone's head, whether that's intentional or not.
Oh, guys, it's so easy to create false memories. I actually have done a few papers on this, and there's been like studies done where, like, one that I can think of is it's so crazy. They had to, like, contact each participant's family to make sure that, because they were going to implant a false memory where they got lost in the mall as a child. And so to make sure, they literally called up each participant's, like, parents, and they were like, did they ever get lost in the mall as a kid, to make sure. And they're like,
Yeah.
made sure that all the people they had did not have that story happen to them. Nothing like that happened to them. And then they would start talking to the participant about, basically, like, oh, do you remember the time when you were such and such years old and you got lost in the mall? And I think it was, I don't remember this exact percentage, but a lot of people, like more than you would think, would go along with it and be like, oh, yeah, I do remember that. And then from there, they would even have people, like, spuriously think, or contribute to the story. Not just
Yes.
to, like, confirm that it happened, but be like, oh, yeah, I remember, because it was during Christmas time and it was this and that.
Oh my
And
gosh.
literally, this never happened. And they confirmed that it never happened.
Right.
There's been so many studies on false memory. Well, I'll link some of the articles below, because I can't remember her name right now, but there's a psychologist who, like, she specializes in it. And it's a huge thing, but it just goes to show you how eyewitness testimonies are not reliable. And just because someone says they saw something, again, it's not that, oh, they're lying. Their brains are lying to them. And this happens all the time. Perception is so subjective, and we don't realize, because we're so quick to believe our senses,
Right.
our
Yes.
sense of sound, our sense of, like, eyesight, of sight, all of our senses. But we have to remember, guys, like, our senses fail us. We are not perfect. We're not, robots.
Definitely
We're only
not,
human.
yeah.
Like, our senses will fail us. And they're doing their best. They're looking for patterns, because, like, it's usually an evolutionary trait. Like, you're looking for patterns so that you can survive. But the unfortunate side of looking for patterns is that you'll see things when they're not really there.
Yeah, exactly. Like, Jesus and your toast. No, guys, Jesus is not in your toast.
It's not Jesus. There's not a man on the moon. I'm sorry to break it to you. We are looking for patterns. So that's why we see shapes in clouds. That's why we see a face in the moon.
Yeah.
That's why we see a Cheeto that looks like Abraham Lincoln and Jesus and toast. It's not those things. It's patterns. We're looking for patterns. And especially, like I mentioned earlier, if you're looking for something, chances are you're going to find it. You're going to find it. Your brain's going to tell you, yeah, it's right there, even if it's not. So, this is all just to say, eyewitness testimony is pretty much it's bullshit.
Yeah,
Like I don't know how else to say it.
and that's one of the things that make it hard. There's so many different aspects that go into solving cases, and I don't think people really realize that. It's easy to stand on the other side and say, you know what, they didn't do a good job, I could have done better, but really, like, we don't really know what happens behind the scenes, and sometimes some cases are harder to solve than others. That's just the nature of it. If they were all easy to solve, they'd all be solved. Everyone who deserves to be in jail would be in jail. But unfortunately, that is just not the way of it.
Yeah, and the unfortunate thing is I think a lot of times I'll hear people say, like, well, why aren't the cops doing their job? Just do your job. But unfortunately, their job is not, like,
cut and dry.
It's not like when you go to a restaurant, you're like, well, give me my food. That's your job, right? Like, that's not the same thing. There's so many things that go into each case, like you're saying.
Yeah, for sure.
And, like, obviously, if it was that easy, every criminal would be in jail, and every non-criminal would not be in jail. But that's not the case, unfortunately. There's so many things to take into consideration. And like you said before, there are definitely crooked cops. There's definitely police officers who have not done everything they should be doing in certain cases. Yeah. But by and large, I really do feel like sometimes we don't give them enough credit, because personally, I can't imagine that kind of job. Like, I don't know. Oh, yeah, no, that is the psychological stress. And
yeah, for sure. The hours, psychological stress, like, all the paperwork. I'm sure, it's a pretty thankless job. Yes. And, I think, again, they are trying their best, so we just need to exercise a little bit of patience,
Yeah, we need to look at it from all angles. That's what this podcast is all about. It's diving deeper.
Yeah, so that was kind of our overview about, our take on true crime and then the positive and negative side effects of that. But we'll also be mentioning a couple possible future episodes we are thinking of doing for sure. One episode that I've really been interested in for a while is the Chicago Tylenol murder, so we'll hopefully be doing an episode about that, as well as, Jack the Ripper, a very infamous unsolved serial killer case for sure. And then Gypsy Rose Blanchard. Avalon, do you want to explain what that case is all about?
Yeah, so Gypsy Rose Blanchard is not like a serial killer. It's a very different case, but it is true crime.
Yeah, definitely.
It's more about Munchausen by proxy syndrome, which, if you don't know, it's basically, usually it's where a mother has, I can't say feigns illness, because Munchausen's disorder is when you feign illness, you pretend to be sick for a various, any reason it might be. Mm-hmm. But Munchausen's by proxy is when you pretend that your child is sick. You either pretend or you actually make them sick, which is really awful, by giving them some kind of, like, substance that they shouldn't be having. So you either make your kid sick or pretend that they're sick. Again, for different reasons. It could be monetary reasons. It could be attention. It could be keeping a spouse. It could be all kinds of different reasons, but it's kind of like the classic tale of Munchausen's by proxy, and how that can go it's already awful to start with, right? Yes. But how extreme it can become. So that one's a super interesting story. If you haven't heard of it, we'll definitely do an episode on that.
Yeah, for sure. And then I also really want to do an episode on internet pedophile rings. I think that's a subject that people don't really know that much information about, and I certainly didn't know that much information either. I first really heard about it on an episode of Case File, actually, and it was called, I believe, episode Cathedral was the episode they discussed it on. And, it was just a whole operation involving several different countries on busting members of internet pedophile rings, and I think crimes against children is one of the most disgusting, horrifying crimes ever, and so, again, I really want to bring awareness to this topic because it is, unfortunately, part of our world, and I do want to get more people information on that, and how dangerous the internet can really be and how you can protect your child,
Yeah, and it's easy to turn a blind eye to these issues because it's kind of like, well, that doesn't happen here, or I don't know anyone that's been affected by that, or it's just so awful that you don't want to think it really happens, but the unfortunate reality is, guys, it does happen. It's more common than you think. And also, like, I know when people hear internet pedophile ring, it's like conspiracy theories, like that's the first thing that comes to your mind, and there's definitely some wild conspiracy theories that we're not endorsing. But there's also, like the ones you're talking about, there's also things that have actually happened, that they sound like a conspiracy theory, like it sounds like too crazy to be real, But these
But-
things do exist, and so I think they need to get more publicity because we need to be
more aware.
More
and
aware,
Yeah, definitely. So, but yeah, that is the end of this episode. Hopefully, you guys enjoyed it, and we will see you next week. Don't forget to follow us on our Instagram at Dark Matter Pod and our Facebook, Dark Matter Podcast.
And for more information, check out our website, which is darkmatterpod.com. Thanks for listening, guys.